Hello everyone, welcome to CloudSEK's special security webinar on peeking into zero-click, zero-day vulnerability. We at CloudSEK has analyzed a zero-day vulnerability that has been dubbed as Follina. The attack vector has been out in the open for 2 years, but a recent increase in dark web chatter regarding the weaponizing was publicly available in POCs to bypass sandboxes and EDRs. Today we have the speaker Anirudh Badra, who's a security researcher at CloudSEK, and Darshit Ashra, who is an associate vice president at CloudSEK. Over to you.
Hey guys, hi, a very good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen. Just let me know once everybody is able to see my screen. Should be right about. Yeah, is my screen visible, guys? Sahil, is it visible?
Yeah, we can see it.
Got it. Okay. So I'll be starting off with what has been dubbed as Follina. I know that sounds weird. The name sounds pretty weird. What exactly is it, and how exactly has it, made its way in the InfoSec community? It has been, I think, quite daunting last 4 or 5 days. Since when it has taken a lot of traction by the public eye. So this is how we have scheduled the webinar. What exactly is, Follina? What exactly is the protocol behind it which makes all the difference, MSDT, the attack surface, the vulnerability analysis and the attack vectors which have been identified as of yet, a short demo with the exploitation tactics and the impact, and also the official workarounds which have been mentioned by Microsoft in their official blog. Plus, I've added a bonus section called detection. So, how are threat hunters detecting, exploits in the wild, and how can you save yourself from this thing called Follina, right? So, what exactly is Follina? I get, the name is actually very something very out of common. Why exactly was it named Follina? So, in the original sample which was submitted to Microsoft, has an area code called 0438, which is a place in Italy called Follina. That's why it's called Follina. That's where it got its name from. So discussing this particular vulnerability, right, which has been dubbed as CV 2022 30190, it is actually pretty similar to what CV 2021 40444 had to offer. It was just a different protocol. That's all. So what we can infer from this is not a new attack vector. It's just an unpatched new vulnerability which came out. But this attack vector of exploiting, protocol schemas has been, around since last couple of years. And we'll discuss why exactly am I saying the last couple of years. Right. So how exactly did this come into picture? So the first known submission to Microsoft's intelligence was on 12th of April by this guy called Crazy Man. And so the way that this happened was he was finding exploit codes on VirusTotal, and he stumbled upon this file, which he submitted, which he found very, odd, because MSDT was being used to invoke PowerShell and to run commands. So this was something that he had not seen before, and he submitted this to Microsoft, but they did not pay much heed to it because it was not a vector which had which involved a lot of user interaction. So MSDT by default is something that if you try and open, it will ask you for a passkey. Now, why did it gain a lot of public traction after 12th of April? By this, we mean that the active exploitation had already started before 12th of April, right? So what exactly is the timeline? So as we talked about, Crazy Man Army submitted this report to Microsoft on 12th of April. Then NowSec tweeted about a POC which actually bypassed that need of the passkey. Now, how was that happening? Is there is a limit of 4096 bytes. So if the malicious code that is being fetched, or the file which is being fetched, if the size of that is less than 4096 bytes, it requires a passkey, which was getting overcome by the fact if you add extra redundant characters, which we'll see in the exploit code. Now, that happened on 27th May. Researchers like Kevin Beaumont, and they dubbed it as a 0-day, and it was gaining a lot of traction since 27th of May. Then, finally, on 30th of May, Microsoft assigned it a CVE ID and released an official blog talking about how you can work around the vulnerability. Since then, we have already seen a lot of threat actors targeting Middle East. We are going to cover a lot of targeted campaigns in Middle East, and we also have seen TA413, which is a Chinese threat actor group exploiting the Follina vulnerability, and they are getting actually very crafty with the payloads which are being offered. Now, an interesting fact which I wanted to cover is in August, this exact same thing happened last August. This same exact vulnerability was alerted to Microsoft by a positive security in Microsoft Teams because they were using the exact same external URIs, which we are now going to modify. So that exact same thing was being done with Microsoft Teams. At that point of time, it was not paid much attention to again by Microsoft, and because it required user interaction and required social engineering. So there was no CV number assigned to it. There was no disclosure publicly, but they did release a patch. This happened during the course of last year. Till December, this was being patched. So this is a very weird timeline which happened, and contrary to popular belief, this is not a new attack vector. This has been around for quite some time. So the meat of the matter. What exactly is MSDT, right? Which is Microsoft Support Diagnostic Tool. Now, you might have heard or you might have encountered, while troubleshooting your Wi-Fi, for example, that a window pane pops up and it shows you that it is trying to troubleshoot something. That is what Microsoft Support Diagnostic Tool is. Now, the problem is, or why is this, being exploited now, is there is a protocol called MSMSDT, which directly passes whatever string to msdt.exe, right? And in this case, we can also utilize the program compatibility wizard, which has the authority to open any program, arbitrary programs. So now, which leads us to opening and invoking PowerShell and executing commands, which is exactly what which is exactly what the exploit code, which is shown in the picture, depicts. Right. In this case, the exploit code is base64 encoded. This is the original exploit code which was being used, which had the Belarusian IP address. This is how it all started. This is the IP address which was This is the sample code which was submitted by CloudSEK. Right. So this is a brief intro to what MSDT actually does. Now, talking about the attack surface, it's very important to understand that the attack surface of this thing is immense, right? We've seen a lot of vulnerabilities in the past, which had extremely immense attack surface. Like we recently we saw Log4j, we've seen Heartbleed in the past, Shellshock in the past. Now, how does this compare to them? It's because so many people use Microsoft products, right? Any product which will have the capacity to invoke external URI schemas is basically vulnerable, right? If I am able to change it and modify it and use invoke MSDT, that is where the problem lies. So just to give you a short idea, the market share of Microsoft Office 365 is still 48.08% as of February 2022, right? So Microsoft products are very heavily used very heavily used, and you open a wrong document, you open a wrong spreadsheet, you open a wrong PDF file which is malformed, and you can get your computer gets attacked, right? And the attacker has the complete control of your computer. So that's how immense the attack surface of this vulnerability is. Talking about in detail what exactly does the vulnerability do, or how does this come into picture, is essentially let's take an example of a document, right? A document is essentially a zip file. So if you unzip the zip file, there is a file called document.xml .rels, which contains the schema links, right? Which are modifiable. So whenever you open a document, it fetches data from these schemas, from these external URIs. Now, what essentially an attacker can do is change those by default, URLs which are mentioned to attacker controlled server. That is exactly what an attacker can do, right? So in this case, if you can see, there is a mention of xmlformats.com, which is a malicious domain, which was hosted maliciously for malicious purpose, which has now been taken down. But you can replace that XML formats to your own IP address, to your own attacker control server, etc., and try and fetch malicious code. Now, what it does is it fetches an HTML file which tries and invokes MSMSDT protocol, which invokes PowerShell in turn, and then runs the following command. So the original sample that we found in the file, or the original sample which was submitted, had the following command, right? It was trying to create an RGB.exe, which could have been a Cobalt Strike beacon, could have been any sort of payload, trying to compromise the victim. So now the possibilities are endless because you've got the authority to run commands on it, because it is a remote, a remote code execution vulnerability. So completely depends upon the intent of the threat actor, what he wants to achieve by running commands. So completely depending upon the intent, he can do whatever he wants. He wants to exfiltrate data, he wants to monetarily harm you, anything under the sun. It depends on his intent. So that's a brief vulnerability analysis. Now, talking about the attack vector, which is very interesting, right? So why did I say that this attack vector has been out in the open for quite some time? Is because there was a security researcher named Benjamin Altpeter released a paper on August 1st, 2020, where he actually tried to describe the security vulnerabilities, or how an attacker can attack Electron apps present on Windows. And there he clearly mentioned how MSMSDT can be, maliciously used to invoke, or run commands, or how it can be done through command line. So that's exactly what he wanted to prove. And he has actually the next big thing which is coming on is also from his paper, which is the search MS vulnerability, right? So this was out in the open in August 2020. Now all the threat actor needed was to get a hold of this information and then create a working exploit, and use the magic of document Microsoft Office 365, right? So that is the attack vector. Now, talking about, we are still working on the example of a document. There are two attack vectors. One would be a zero-click vector, which is what we are going to see in the demo. Now, what does that mean? Is if you have the preview pane open, so that in the view section of your document, the file manager, if you enable preview pane, what happens is you get a sample preview of what of the document that you're trying to open, right? Even if you hover on top of it, it gets exploited. So if you're trying to hover over a malformed document, that basically makes it a zero-click vector. The second one would be the single-click vector, which is if you have a document and you have not enabled the preview pane, you open it and you click on the enable editing, because by default, any document that you download from the internet is read-only. So once you start enable the editing, you click on that button and the attacker has access to your computer. That's all it requires, right? So these are the two attack vectors that are very common and are very popular right now with respect to Follina in mind. Right. Now comes the important parts, right? What exactly have we seen out there in the wild while hunting for threats, right? So there have been so many campaigns in the past 2-3 days, and this is CloudSEK's primary research, where we found our global threat research team has found out that people have already started targeting Middle East in numbers, and we have seen, like, for example, there's this VIP invitation to Doha Expo, which was circling around. And this was a malformed document. The moment that you open this document, you get compromised. So that's how threat actors have already sprung into action and trying to impersonate valid campaigns and putting out malformed documents and baiting people to click on their documents. That's how simple that it can be. So it invites mass phishing campaigns. This particular vulnerability. So in this case, what exactly was so this was the command that was trying to run. It was mounting it was mounting the web DAV, and then trying to download a malware OS update.exe, which could be anything under the sun, right? Which it could be a ransomware, etc., etc. So now that's how threat actors have started using this particular vulnerability. They'll use it to piggyback on and then try and install their own ransomwares, try to escalate privileges, try to gain persistence, etc., etc. Laterally move into the infrastructure, because that's all. All of that can be done with this vulnerability. So now this particular case in keeping this particular case in mind, what exactly was this particular thing doing? So the C2 server was hosted on that IP address, and it had a different sort of scenario for Linux, and it had a different thing for Windows. So it was using malicious LNK files, which is the shortcut file, to deploy the OSD update.exe, which is a known malicious software. And for Linux, it was trying to install, a Mirai variant, which we can see through the virus total screenshot that we've attached. So this is how they've created a well-established scheme already, targeting the Middle East. Now, another interesting campaign that we found is the fake monkeypox awareness campaign. So, as we've already seen, right, the monkeypox thing was very popular in the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months, where a new disease has been out, and there were a lot of advisories even by WHO. So they use these presently known campaigns and try to form a document out of it, and create a malformed document out of it. Now, the interesting part is each and every one of them is getting extremely crafty with the way that they are handling it, right? They're coming up with new payloads. They're trying to they're basically trying new payloads to try and bypass EDRs, bypass sandboxes, etc. Um, a lot of campaigns also involve stealing your NTLM hashes directly. So that directly attacks your AD infrastructure, right? And there are simple one-line commands which can directly bypass your Windows Defender and can get your NTLM hashes. It's actually not that difficult to be a threat actor these days. It's You just have to open Twitter and look at the publicly available exploits, and then try and throw everything on the wall till something sticks. So that, and the fact that 97% or 98% of all known exploitation attempts are on already publicly available exploits. So this can be proved by the fact that this vulnerability was out in the open, or this attack vector was out in the open since 2020, right? But then the InfoSec community identified, or this became very popular after 12th of April or 27th of May, and after that it gained a lot of traction, and after that only we were able to see a lot of exploitation attempts and APTs sprung into action. So this basically proves the point that 98% of, or 97% of all known exploitation which happens in the wild is using publicly available vulnerabilities and POCs. Um, yeah. Another example is, which was actually one of the first, was the Chinese threat actor group TA413, impersonating the women empowerment desk of the Central Tibetan Administration and trying to exploit the same. Right. So in the same similar manner, the moment that you open the document, it basically takes a hold of your computer. So that's how even they were doing it. So these were the Chinese threat actor group was one of the first to get into action. So we've also the global threat research team of CloudSEK has also, they've triaged a lot of forums to identify discussions pertaining the latest vulnerability Follina in question. So we've already seen people selling mass exploitation kits, and people talking about evading antiviruses and sandboxes and Defender, etc., etc. Right? People selling off the POCs that they've created. So all of this started after essentially, after we've seen the first known tweet by NowSec on 27th of May. So that's how it has gained a lot of traction, even on the dark web by threat actors. Talking about the exploit sample, I'll stop sharing my screen for a second and share the other screen. I'll show a small brief demo as to what can be done and how is it actually exploited, what does it look like. So you send a malicious document by email, and there's a victim machine. who receives the document, opens it or hovers over it, looks at the preview, and then there's an outbound connection which we've already set to our attacker control server, and it basically fetches the code and invokes the commands and the using PowerShell. So I just stop sharing my screen and share the other screen again. Just give me a second. Okay, so I hope my screen is visible. So I am setting it up to open calculator.exe, and the moment now this is my attacker machine on the left side, and on the right side I've got the victim machine. So what I've also enabled the preview pane, as you can see here. So if I click on clickme.rtf and it gets open, previewed, I see that calculator gets open, right? So that's how easy it is for a threat actor to exploit your machine, right? So I'll share the presentation again. Yeah, so that's exactly what we've been talking about, right? It's a single click or a zero click vector that we have seen here, and it's so simple to exploit it, right? So now talking about what are the impacts of this particular vulnerability. We've already seen people coming into action, TAs coming into action, having mass phishing attacks, and using it to steal NTLM hashes, right? So a major target using this is getting a shell on the server, getting NTLM hashes to your AD infrastructure, and installing ransomwares. Once I've installed my dropper, which essentially laterally moves, has a lot of privilege escalation suits, and then essentially owns your system, right? So it's another RC bug which is so impactful and so easy to exploit, trivial, that it'll become very popular, right? The business and critical infrastructure impact is also very evident. We've already seen in the last year that there have been USD $14 billion in ransomware payments, right? These are the payments which have been made in the last year, and not exactly the damages also, right? So that the damages are even more. APT groups, as we've seen in the intelligence section, that they've already sprung into action, and they have started a mass scale phishing attacks. They have started mass scale phishing attacks. So you essentially you can take over the servers. The possibilities are endless because it completely depends upon the intent of the attacker. If he wants to, stay in your infrastructure for maintain persistence, stay in your infrastructure, exfiltrate data, that's one of the possibilities. Other possibilities would be monetary harm. It depends on completely the intent of the threat actor. So that's how impactful this vulnerability is. Now the workarounds, right? What can we do to basically stop this from happening? The vulnerability is a 0 day. There is still no available patch. So what exactly you must do to stop this from happening? As of now, these are the official two workarounds which have been mentioned. First one is you can disable the MSDT URL protocol directly. Now that is one way which has been described in the official Microsoft blog. The second way is you can enable the attack surface reduction rule in Defender called block office create process rule. Now once that happens, your Microsoft Office suite will not be able to create child processes. So what is happening is your winword.exe opens, and the sub process called MSDT opens, and then which is invoking PowerShell. So your winword.exe, the parent process, will not be able to open a child process. So it's stopping from creating any child processes. Essentially, that's what we are doing in the second workaround. The third point regarding this is that before this vulnerability, before 30th May, the defender was actually identifying this the exploit malicious document, but as a different vulnerability, which was not very scalable. So now what they've added is, from the given version, if you try and invoke PowerShell using the MSDT command line, it will stop it, and it'll also stop any HTML file or any HTML commands being dropped by msdeti script.a. Like that is what it will show. So that's the new version of that's the improvement that they've made to Defender to identify the attacks which have been happening. Next, we have the detection, right? How can you detect? For this is very important for threat hunters. How do you detect the exploitation attempts? So one is using something called as Sigma framework. It's very similar to what Yara rules can do. You have a Sigma framework in which you can feed these conditions, and this is an experimental Sigma rule which you can use to find out if there have been any exploitation attempts. The second is actually more reliable, which is using this reg key um, to identify if there were any outbound connections made using Microsoft Office. So this is actually the most used way of hunting for this particular exploitation attempt. So that's the second detection attempt. That's actually all from this webinar. We'll take questions now. If anybody has any questions, so we can cater to them now. Okay. I guess that was it from my end. Anjana?
Okay. I see there's a question from Somik. Can you see that on the chat, Anirudh?
Yeah, I can see. Okay, so basically the unofficial patches are also doing the exact same workarounds which have been mentioned in in the workarounds or the official workarounds. So basically it will stop the MSDT protocol from functioning. Now the adverse effects to stopping the MSDT protocol is still not out yet. Could be could not be anything or could be something. So would still prefer using the official workaround rather than an unofficial patch and wait for the official patch only.
All right. Samik, we believe your questions was answered, right? Okay. Are there any questions, anyone on the call? You can raise hands in case you have any question. We can give you the access to speak. So you'll see the hand button on the below option screen. All right, I think we can close then. Thank you so much, Anirudh, for walking all of us through the security incident. And thanks everyone for joining us on a short notice. I hope we were able to make it efficient, useful for you.
Thank you so much for joining in, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.